Elon Musk recently interviewed with Christian ministry, the Babylon Bee, and in the space of that interview, there was a point in the interview where he actually rebuked the interviewers from the Babylon Bee. We'll talk about that in today's video, and there's a couple of lessons we as Christians need to take from this particular situation. So we're going to look at a biblical lesson which we can learn from this back and forth, but also at the same time we can learn how to deal and think through these sorts of situations when they happen in real life, which are the two things we obviously deal with on this channel. So before I show you this clip and we start to discuss this, bear in mind the Babylon Bee is a satire Christian company. So some of this stuff is said in jest, but also there's clearly a serious element to some of these things that's actually being spoken about. Now this interview proceeded on a Sunday, it would seem, and that was where the point of issue actually came from. This was in regards to Sabbath keeping. So listen to what Elon Musk says here.
We're a ministry.
Well, how come we're doing the show on a Sunday?
Why aren't
you heathens in church? This is supposed to be a day of rest. God said, don't work on Sunday. Okay.
Now, when you hear the response to what Elon Musk just said, you might actually be shocked or surprised. But before we get to this, I want to focus on 5 points in regards to the Sabbath. And even before we get to those 5 points in today's video, I want to just make this quite clear that when we do a video like this, I want you to not just think about Elon Musk or thinking about the Sabbath as a topic, because the fact of the matter is you may not be engaging or interact with a billionaire on any given day, but you are going to be interacting with different people who may bring up different things. And it's important that you know the Bible for yourself, but also because that could put you in a position to be a blessing to somebody else, like we're going to discuss in today's video. Now, I want you to be sensitive first and foremost to what Elon Musk just said. Now, bear in mind, like I said earlier on in today's video, he's saying some of this stuff in jest, but at the same time, there's clearly a serious element to what he was actually saying. And sometimes the serious element is what makes a joke or something said in jest actually really impactful or funny. But it's highlighting the hypocrisy that many people look at Christians with, because people who are not Christians believe certain things about Christians, and when they do certain things which goes against that, you find yourself in a position like this where Elon Musk is saying, you guys are a bunch of heathens, why are you not basically doing what the Bible says? And this leads me on to my second qualifier before we get into the 5 points for today's video. And that is, as Christians, don't make the mistake of acting as if you are better than somebody who is an unbeliever. From God's perspective, it's God and everybody else who is just a sinner. So don't ever think, even if you know something about the Bible, that means that you're better than somebody else. But now let's get to the 5 points in regards to the Sabbath day, which as Christians, we should know and be able to easily just respond to somebody who may have these sorts of questions. And the first thing we need to understand about the Sabbath day is that, as you can see here, the Sabbath was for doing good. You see, many people just think that the Sabbath day was a day where you just isolated yourself in your house and you didn't do anything. But a good example we could look at from Mark chapter 3, as you can see here, and we could just look at verse 4 to 5 for sake of today's video. Jesus is here about to heal a man, and notice what he says. He says, is it lawful, right? Is it acceptable to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life or to kill? And the people he was asking, these religious leaders of the day, held their peace. And in verse 5, we can see he looked around in anger, it says, at the hardness of their hearts. And then he said to the man, stretch forth your hand. So doing good on the Sabbath day is clearly not a problem. Point number 2 in regards to the Sabbath day is you could actually meet people on the Sabbath day. Now there's multiple passages attesting to this in the Bible for us to actually look at. We can just look at one example here from Acts chapter 16, verse 13, which is documented in the early church history. And it says, and on the Sabbath, we went out of the city by a riverside. This is obviously speaking about the gospel writer Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, and he's obviously traveling around with Paul the apostle here and other disciples. So on the Sabbath day, they went out to the riverside where prayer was wont to be made. So they were going to a place where they were planning to pray. And we sat down and we spake unto the women which came there, which resorted there. So people met up on the Sabbath day. for various different reasons. Point number 3 in regards to the Sabbath is that you could actually teach people on the Sabbath day as well. And we could look at Luke chapter 13 verse 10 here just as an example. This is speaking about Jesus when he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. I'm actually going to give a bonus one in today's video to make it 6 points regarding the Sabbath. But hopefully you're seeing quite clearly that there was multiple different things people were doing on the Sabbath day. These are sorts of responses that you could think about for yourself personally, but also you could speak and engage with someone who may bring this up. Now, we're not going to go there in this passage, but I'm going to reference it for you to read this in your own time from start to finish. But the fourth example in today's video is that the Acts 15 council did not make it necessary for salvation. They obviously spoke about other things which were necessary for salvation, but Sabbath keeping was clearly not one of them. Now, before we get to the bonus one, the fifth one in today's video I think is a very powerful one because it gives us even more illumination about what the Sabbath actually is and the whole essence of what the Sabbath was actually for. And what Hebrews 4 is showing us is that the true Sabbath is entering into God's rest. And this is, as you can see, from Hebrews chapter 4 through verse 4 to 11. It says, "For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise." And he now goes on to quote Genesis chapter 2, which says, "God did rest on the seventh day from all his works." And then he continues and links this to something in the book of Psalms. And he says, "And in again, if they shall enter into my rest," speaking of Psalm 95. Now, he's tying these two things in to teach a very powerful concept here in regards to the Sabbath day. Notice what he says. He says, "Seeing therefore it remains that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief." So in the Old Testament, when the people were coming out of Egypt as slaves and entering into what is commonly referenced as the promised land, that was considered as some sort of rest. But notice what it says as we continue in Hebrews. It says, "Again, he limits a certain day," saying in David. So he's again quoting what he quoted up here in Psalm 95. "Today, after so long a time, as it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts." And he makes this very clear here, right? And some other translations will say Joshua to make this more clear. But notice what he says. "For if Jesus had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken of another day?" So the point he's basically making here is, if the promised land was that final rest, synonymous with Genesis 2, the Sabbath day's rest, then there would be no need in Psalm 95, which came after, to talk about a day when we would enter into God's rest. Now, as you scroll down, right, to read just from 9 to 11, right, notice what it says. "There remains therefore a rest to the people of God." And bear in mind, he started this part talking about the Sabbath in reference to Genesis chapter 2. And he goes on to say, "For he that is entered into his rest, he has also ceased from his own works as God from his." And then he says, "Let us therefore labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief." So one point that's being made here is that entering into God's rest, right, which is salvation, is the bigger picture in regards to what the Sabbath truly was. Now, before discussing the Babylon Bee's response to what Elon Musk actually said about the Sabbath, remember Elon Musk said this.
God said, "Don't work on Sundays." Okay.
Now, Elon, just for the record, Sunday as you think it is was not the Sabbath day. And we're going to need to look at what the Babylon Bee said next in regards to this.